All right. Cool. I know there's at least one person who's coming into the shop today who said he wanted to see this.
I said we got a big crowd tonight. I appreciate everybody showing up here this morning.
Oh, good. Great. That publicity worked.
13 people. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Well, Travis put out an all-member email the other night, so hopefully I'll come up to expectation. All right. Well, we're just about ready to rock and roll, aren't we? Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our hand tool SIG. And it's Lewis is producing today, and I'm here, and very much enjoyed the last the one that we did on scrapers, and I've been using a scraper a lot to the point where I blistered my hand and then knocked off the blister before I realized it was there. So you got to go easy when you're using sharp steel tools that also get a little hot. So, but wow, did it work well. So I'm going to talk today about a close relative of the scraper that's been used to create some more shapes. We talked about how the scraper is mostly used for straight or flat surfaces. However, if you want to make things like, how's that for the camera? Okay, this is just a little piece I made yesterday afternoon. Oh, superb. You can see here we have a little beading, a bit like we had in the photos on the little write-up I did. And here we have, I just had some scraps of rosewood and maple. And so here we have a little bit of stringing that you can see close up that I just put in yesterday afternoon and then put a little bit of finish on it. But relatively easy to do once you know how, and you know how to make the tool to do it. You can, of course, buy expensive tools to do it, but you can also make it for next to nothing. This is the one that we're going to work on today, or that I will work on today. It is it's known as a scratch stock, and this is a little blank piece of steel that we're going to use, and I made this out of the same rosewood I got my little piece for there for the stringing. But so we'll work on that today. However, before we actually go into how you make them, what I want to do is show you how it works, and then I'll show you how to make them. So what they are is basically, as I told you, it's a little piece of steel that you can make it from a card scraper. You don't want one that's too thick. I got mine from a Japanese saw that I ruined some years ago. So I had a spare saw laying around that was useless. But you can just cut a piece off, even something with a curve perhaps, and then you work on it. So in this case, this is a piece that I've already cut out that as I say, came from a damaged Japanese saw, and became a source of quite a few scratch stocks for me. What you do is you make the stock. Here, let me show you one. You custom make it to the design that you want. So for example, this little guy, you can see it's thin and it goes to a real thin point. So something that is wedge shaped is going to go in there nicely. Here's another one that is shaped so the bottom of the groove is going to be flat, and it's going to be an even groove all the way through. This is one for beading. So you can see there's just a little semicircle cut on each side, and you'll notice there's an ever so slight difference in this little piece here. Let me point to it with a corner. This little bit here. which gives me a different width of my beading channel. So if I want something somewhat wider than this little piece of bead, then I just cut it to be wider. Or as, and then for you saw the stringing, so I will demonstrate that as well. But as Lewis mentioned to me before class, when you're making something like a small box, this is a great way to, if you create the right scratch stock, to create that little groove, that 1/8 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch or whatever you need, little groove that you need just for a small bottom of a box. You don't necessarily want to put that 4-inch wide piece on a router and route it out if in a few minutes you can just do it by hand. So basically what you do is you file the thing, you basically file it much the same way as you file a card scraper as we did last week, but of course we're going to focus on the curved surfaces as well. But we create a blade out of this little piece of steel, which means that the edges are going to have to be flat and ideally at 90 degrees, exactly 90 degrees to this edge. And both of these have to be flat. And then of course the edge and that little curve have a little bit of a polish to it. But we'll get into that later. But this is a really, there are many different uses that you can put this tool to. You can even use it in setting out inlay, maybe, getting a nice even bottom on some inlay where you've cut out the edges. But anyway, let me go ahead and I will demonstrate on this piece of wood how this thing works. And it's kind of fun because it's so cheap and so easy. Yes.
Oh, we have a question. Is that
I just realized that you have a bunch of new attendees, and I'm sorry, I only now clicked in, but at some point it'd be good to just let everybody know like what you've done over the course of like the last year in terms of topics and such, because you've done so many great things. And for people who are new to this meeting, it would be just nice for them to realize what happens here. And I just wanted to sort of tip my hand to all those people who are visiting for the first time, because it's something great that Paul has been doing. And it would just be great if we knew what his agenda had been, so you get a feel for what this hand tool special interest group delivers over the course of time. Sorry, Paul, I just wanted to interrupt early on so that you had that in your mind as you went forward.
Oh, well, the challenge now is to remember it all. But we basically, each week we do a little subject matter demonstration and discussion about something to do with hand tools. So a couple of times ago, we had a real fun one that was where we went out and we compared hand tools to machine tools and compared the functions. Last time we did card scrapers. I'm going to be going back to some planes and maybe some rabbiting. I want to introduce a bit more of the wood skills this year. But if you go back, if you go to our website and you look at the archive, I think pretty much everything that we have done since we started in April, just after the COVID thing hit and we couldn't do anything live. Since then, I think everything that we've done has been recorded, back to my initial fumbling introduction there. So go ahead, Paul, if you want to get sharpening, there's plenty of stuff on sharpening there.
Yeah, I was going to comment. I had no personal appreciation for the magic of what sharp hand tools can do until I'd seen from your teaching us how to sharpen on a whetstone or on flat stones or other ways of sharpening, the jigs you can use with them, how you can turn a hand plane into something that's magical, chisels into just remarkably sharp precision tools. Again, these are all the kinds of things that Paul has covered over the past year plus. And I just wanted people to have sort of a backdrop for what they can get out of participating in this. Paul puts a lot of effort into it. And I just wanted to make sure that people at least had an appreciation for the backstory and how long this has been going on. You're welcome to join. He does it twice a month. Paul, I just wanted to get that in there. If you had done it earlier, I'm sorry to repeat it, but I wanted to make sure people understood.
No, that's just fine. I just swung into the whole thing, just as I usually do. So that's great. And your timing was good just before I did a demo. So yeah, usually the format is I'll talk about what we're doing and do some kind of demo. Did you have another question?
We have a question.
Yes.
Is that still blank sharp? these right here, are these sharp?
Yes, yes, and let me show you how, if I may. Do I have anything to clear the board with? We did yesterday. Yeah, let me see if this will do it. Yeah, this will do it, right. Last week, we discussed card scrapers. And with the card scraper, what we do is we create a 90-degree, basically, if this is a cross-section of our piece of steel, we create a 90-degree, my drawing is terrible, I'm sorry. I can saw a straighter line than I can draw. But this is exactly 90 degrees. And we roll over the edge to create a blade on the card scraper. Now, with this, what we're going to do, and I mentioned this in our last one, that I have a card scraper that I use with 90s, especially for in between coats with shellac and something like that. This little corner, by the time we create this, is already a blade. It's just a 90-degree blade. So it's, you know, the average plane blade is 25 degrees. You can get chisel blades down to 17 degrees. So this is but this corner should be absolutely sharp, and that's what we'll be shooting for. Now, if we're doing the card scraper, and this is an exaggeration, all we have to focus on is what is sharp between basically here, where, say, our block is that holds the card scraper, and this has to be sharp, this has to be sharp, and this has to be sharp. So yes, we are going to create a blade. We're not actually scraping, we're cutting, but we're going to do it gently. And it's sort of a hybrid scraping and cutting, but I will show you how it works. But basically, yes, I'm going to run you through how you sharpen this thing up. And it's easier than it looks, because those curves, there are some solutions to the curves. So anyway, simple little tool. This is a rather small piece of, I think this is mall oak, which is a local oak known as canyon live oak, and it used to be used for the hubs of wagons and so on. Very, very, very hard wood. So I made that out of a little piece that I have around. You can get that kind of stuff from Lumbercycle. So I used that. In this case, I'd seen a picture of Garrett Hack's scrapers, and I made this yesterday as I already needed some rosewood for the stringing. But basically what you do is you use the edge of so you need a nicely planed edge of the wood in order to give you a guide for this block. And we're going to use this just everything that's above my beautifully manicured nail. Everything that's above there is what's going to be in action. So that's all that has to be sharp. The rest of it doesn't matter so much. But let me show you what we do. First of all, we start off at a very shallow angle. Well, let me just stick something under here, or that's going to drive me absolutely nuts. I'm sorry, folks. Nothing worse than a wobbly bench, except no bench. And I can feel this is not tightly enough secured yet. Okay, so I'm going to use just the tip of it at first. I'm going to take it. I'm just going to give myself a guide. You know how, like when you're cutting a dovetail or a tenon or whatever, you want to cut the fibers on the far edge where you need it to be sharp. So here we're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to angle it way back here, using the block against the side of the wood. And you can see it's cutting a little line. Not much. This is just like all of these things where you're cutting into the surface of a piece of wood and then creating some kind of action underneath, whether it's inlay or whatever. You want your initial lines, and where you breach the surface of the wood, you want no tear out, no nothing in terms of fuzziness and all of that stuff. So that's where it's important to have these blades really, really sharp. When you think about it, woodwork, even sanding is cutting. Woodwork is either measuring or cutting. think about that when you have a long drive. It's either measuring or cutting, and everything in woodwork is cutting. In the case of do you see those little curls coming off there? That's not sawdust being scraped off, that's wood being cut out. So I'm going to keep going at that gentle angle, slowly bringing it up. If it feels rough, then I back that angle back down again.
Hey, Paul, the one,
Yes.
the scraper that you have in your hand, it
Yes.
looks as though it has two different contours. Is that particular one for two different uses? If you flipped it upside down, would you be using it for a different contour?
Every blank has 4 corners. So we can use each corner. Absolutely. Yes. I'm going to demonstrate the other contour in just a minute. So, okay. So you can see there, we're getting a nice groove. I'm going to mostly work back here now because I don't have to create the whole thing. And you don't want to necessarily run the blade along the whole of this each time, but more a bit like when you're hand cutting a dado or a rabbit. The difficult part, and here's something else, as you do this, if it feels rough consistently, try going the other direction. But again, remember to move this. I find I can hold things better if I pull them towards me generally. So I try to do that. But if I feel something that's a little rough, you don't have to press especially hard. But you do want to be careful because it's so easy to pop this baby out of the groove. Do you see it's beginning to curl off on the edges there?
Paul, you know, when you taught us about the planing, you did say that when you were going in one direction on the grain, you would get a better result. And
yes,
you should feel that. Are you doing the same thing here where if the grain is coming up in the direction that you're moving, it's easier to cut, and so you should be going in that direction?
Yes, especially if you see any roughness happening.
Okay.
And you want to feel, once you start cutting that bead, you can feel along the edge and feel if you're getting it in the right direction. But just like when you're planing, just trying to get the end of there. I could also push it that way. So you can use a combination. It's only that last bit of surface that really has to be super nice. But generally speaking, if this begins to get a little rough, it's because either the blade hasn't been sharpened properly or has gone out of sharp, as it were, gone dull, or you're not putting enough care and attention into just running it. And eventually, you can start bringing it up towards the vertical there. Don't know if you can see that stuff coming off the end there, but definitely cutting those pieces out. So that actually feels smoother to me. Do you see how it's getting a nice round bead there?
Yeah.
So just do what feels good in terms of.
Is that a philosophy for life, Paul?
What, do what feels good?
Yeah.
As long as it doesn't hurt anyone else.
There you go.
I think if the wood had a consciousness, it would be glad to be revitalized as something that's a thing of beauty. Okay, now, those of you who have router tables, if you can buy a router that will give you this cut, you might have by now kind of got it roughly set and be ready to do a trial run, but you wouldn't have almost completed your bead. And as you can see, another couple of minutes of working, and I would have a bead along the whole length of this piece of wood. And when I stop cutting, when I get to the depth that I've got it set for, it just kind of, you can feel it. So there's a lovely little little groove there with a bead. It's fairly small, but then these things are very often about subtle touches, just creating that shadow line. And now I've got a little bit of 220 and I'm just giving it a very light standing there.
You got a question?
Yes.
Would a longer block, sorry about that camera folks, would a longer block with more contact to the edge of the board result in a more stable cut? Any drawbacks to a larger block?
I haven't tried anything much bigger than this. If you look at the commercially available tools, they almost look like two-handed instruments. So I just don't know. I've only done the small stuff. There's no reason why you couldn't make a custom molding up to a certain size with one of these. So I don't know about that. I'm going to guess when it's a 1/2 inch or 5/8 inch thick piece, but as long as and if I planed this edge really nice and smooth, which I did, then my block is enough to guide me. But you know what? You're making your own tools, so you can experiment.
Someone asked,
find out what's best for you.
Someone asked what type of tool steel. You said this came from a saw.
This came from a saw. The most available, what you want is, you need something, a tool steel that has spring to it, but not too springy, because obviously if you're holding this in a block, you can't have it be moving because you're trying to get a nice clean cut, but there's a little spring in it. So an old saw blade is really good. You know, when you're comfortable with going back to Kobe's swap meet or when they have it open, that might be a good place to get an old saw blade, or just, you know, sacrifice a card scraper or find a used one. It doesn't have to be, you're going to clean it up anyway. So it doesn't matter if it's rusty as long as it's not too pitted. As long as you can get some faces and edges that are clean.
How thick would you say that is?
This
1/8 of an inch? Not even that.
is thicker than this, and this is 20 thousandths. So this card scraper is 20 thousandths. That would do just fine. Anything, I'd say probably this one is a little thicker. It might be 50 thousandths. You get up to 80 thousandths, and I think you've got a really good scratch stock, but it's more tedious to prepare, and I don't know if it gives you an advantage or not. But it's just, this is one of those wonderful things about hand tools, is you just play around and experiment. And if you dream up a shape that you want to make, and especially if you look at the average router bit sets, there's a very limited amount of shapes available to you. So this is a way to make your own mark. So,
Paul,
yes.
when you at the beginning you were using tin snips to cut that. How can you do that without getting curl in the blade?
Well, the thing is, you're going to work it afterwards. So yes, there will be some curl in the blade. And what you can do is you can file that back. You can hammer it flat. I wouldn't recommend heating it because you'll take out the tensile strength of the. If you have a better way to cut, then do so. But you'll find that a decent pair of tin snips will. I have a slightly heavier duty one than those, but a decent pair of tin snips will do it. And then you just hammer any bent bits back into shape, because you're going to joint the edge anyway, which you'll see shortly.
Okay.
So anyways, here so we've got the bead. I think we've established that we can get a nice round bead there. Now you hear that noise. That's when you want to back off, and if it starts catching, try going the other way. It's just started to catch there because there's a slight change in grain. So once you get down close, then you start working it more lightly, just to get yourself there. And you can use 250 or finer sandpaper to clean that groove out. You can also make yourself, wait for the corny joke or the pun, a Groovy groove cleaner. This is made out of a cut nail and it's just stuck into a piece of wood and then ground down. As you see, I overheated this one. I was actually trying to make a 1/16 chisel bit, which was something else that Garrett had taught us. But anyway, it's great for clearing the groove out. as well as being a chisel. And if your groove is wider, you've got a slightly wider piece at the other end. But again, virtually free. If any of you needs a cut nail, I'll be more than happy to give you one. I've got a bunch that I haven't used for years and years. So, so anyway, let's turn it around. And now we'll, I'm turning it around just so that we can demonstrate something else. So Travis, you were asking about that little other side to this baby. And here we are. So you remember at the beginning, I showed you this stringing?
Yes.
And this little groove here?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so this is what makes that groove.
Okay.
And we do exactly the same technique. First of all, it's literally held in place by a screw. So the making of this is cut your block out. I didn't even bevel the edges, but bevel the edges if you so choose. Drill a hole with a screw that goes through to there. Use a bandsaw to cut this little slot here. And then slide your piece of metal in. Or your not your metal, your scratch stock, your scratch. And you set how deep you want that to be and how far into the piece by loosening off the screw.
So then the screw goes all the way through the block, up to the blade?
To the blade, yes. Yes, so it's just the tip of the screw that's actually holding the blade in place. And this has been in place so long that it's stuck in place, and I'm not going to waste time loosening it up now. So I'm going to do the screwdriver up, and then I'm going to show you a blank, not a blank. Another one that is set to the same kind of thing, and you can see there's a gradient there. I can avoid that gradient if I want to just go, say, an inch into it. Then, obviously I'd want a bigger piece of metal, but basically I can play around with it. I want to support my metal as much out to work to the cutting surfaces as possible. So, you might need to be a little creative if you want to get creative, but that's all part of the fun, isn't it? So, making a groove. So we want this groove to be approximately, I'd say 3/16 of an inch in from the edge. So we have painstakingly set it up, and I'm going to do very much the same thing. You want to be over an edge. I don't know if that speaks for itself, but you want to be over an edge so that your hand can get underneath the wood. But again, holding it, I'm marking that first line. Maybe that first line may or may not be cutting. I think that one just established the line, but it's already establishing, a clean cut along along the edge of that groove.
Paul?
Yes.
Each time you've drawn that first line, you seem to have done it with greater caution. Is that because you're really establishing the track that you're going to follow henceforth?
Absolutely. Establishing the track and also establishing the squareness of the inner edge of this here. You see how sharp that is right down on that? See how sharp that is? You're actually breaking the fibers. Once you get, just like when you're cutting a mortise and tenon or you're cutting a dovetail or whatever, and you're using a chisel, if you have a very sharp chisel, then you cut the fibers. And you actually break the fibers. The difficulty that most people have with hand tool work, as you mentioned, the magic of having a sharp blade, is not having a sharp blade, because then you tend to, before you cut it, you actually damage you squish down the bunch of straws, to use that allegory, that metaphor, whatever it is, that comparison. So yes, you are cutting that clean edge, and that's why when doing, for example, dovetails or tenons, it pays to use a marking knife, because you're not just marking out where you intend to cut, you're actually cutting the fibers. And this is doing more or less the same thing. I question whether it was cutting the fibers the very first time I ran it down, because there was no waste at all, but it's beginning to throw off a little waste now.
Great, thank you.
But yeah, it's always when you go through the surface like that, that is the moment when you can ruin a carefully cut joint or a joint that's going to be carefully cut. And it can be just because something is blunt. Now, when I'm just inlaying something, and I say blithely, when I'm just inlaying stringing, which I don't do, I've still got to explore that. But having done this thing today, I really, doing that yesterday was so rewarding, because when you plane away the stringing and you've got those color contrasts and so on, it's just really sad. So you can see I can go as deep as I want, probably, and not critical. Be good if it was all the way, you know, the same depth all the way, but again, not critical. And then if we have time, I will come back to it. And here's a little aside. When Garrett Hack taught us a class in which he taught how to do this, he made note that when he does inlay on his furniture, he does things like this, and he puts his name in Morse code. So for hundreds of years in the future, when you look at Antiques Roadshow, if it so exists, they'll look at Garrett Hack's furniture and go, this is a hack. And they'll be absolutely right, because it will have his name in Morse code, and you'll be able to not deny that he did it.
We have a question. Is there any difference in technique when cutting cross grain?
Be more careful. If you feel confident enough with your marking knife, maybe mark that first very light mark that cuts those fibers. But then you're introducing two blades and two potential locations. So I would just, first of all, I'm not crazy about going, I wouldn't bead on a cross grain, for example, for obvious reasons. It's just not, you know, one of the reasons a bead is helpful on furniture is because it creates some protection against dings on the corner. But so I wouldn't bead on cross grain. But if you're doing, say, a drawer front, you may well want to do stringing all the way. So the key to that is really, I think, just getting it started really, really gently, being patient, and just, but, well, actually, yeah. Can we back up enough to put in here? I'm going to have to move this slightly. I'm glad you mentioned that, because cross grain is challenging. But like everything, I think having a very sharp blade, thinking about what you're going to do, and then doing what you're going to do very carefully. You can hear the sound is different. So this is where I haven't sharpened this for quite some time. You see how I'm just doing it a great deal more carefully?
Yeah, so many more grains to cut.
Yeah. Yes. And if you're trying to create something where these two coordinate here, it's so easy to run over there. So you need to always run this one backwards across. But we'll get there.
Do you have a greater concern of tear out when doing cross grain?
Absolutely. You still have a concern, but you see, now I'm beginning to get, I'm not going to go all the way, because this is just answering questions. You can see just by, again, to go back to my old phrase, put some music on and just enjoy it. Once you get to here, don't push it. Just like with saws, just like with any blade, you can push it too hard, but you can see we can get a nice clean groove there. Let me see if I can clean it out a little bit. I haven't completed it, but oh, well, you know what? That end is not square, so this kicked over a little bit. But you can see there is some damage there. There's some damage there, and there's a little bit of damage there. So you got to be real careful. But when you're getting down to these super fine tolerances, if there's a tiny gap between stuff, the glue is going to, first of all, expand the fibers a little bit. And if there's a tiny gap between stuff, people aren't going to get that close, and unless you're in, some prize-winning, award-winning show or whatever. But people aren't going to get close and go, whoa, you know what? I can see a little glue instead of maple in there. Just the overall effect is what you're looking for, and it's usually quite subtle. So, but you can imagine a table leg with things like this. This might be a bit distracting in a table leg, but it could be fun in a drawer. But a long straight piece of beading, going all the way down a nice dark piece of, light beading down a dark piece. What's fun is that it looks so, for the want of a better word, classy when you're finished with it, and it's so easy to do, and yet there was a whole period of American furniture where this was the hallmark of a craftsman. It's really easier than sawing through a piece of wood. So anyway, I will get back to it, but you can see how you put this together, or you can alternate sizes, change sizes. Like I say, if you want to do Morse code, then you throw in a half, whatever it takes to do it. So that's kind of fun. I like that, Garrett, marking his pieces like that. So, okay, so I've shown you how to do it. So now let me show how you make something that does it. Any further questions about the actual doing?
Once you've cut the groove and you've inset the wood, what are the subsequent steps you use to level the insets down to the surface of the wood?
If I don't get to that, remind me before we finish.
Okay, good.
Because I will actually, I've got some glue, and if I can, I will, you know what? Let's do it very quickly. Let me at least glue these in, and then the glue will be setting up while we. Now, I'm sure, and I seem to remember being taught to be more careful than I'm being. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to just set up a few, and what I'll do is I'll glue those in there, and then with any luck, we'll get back to.
You don't drop the glue first?
I'm setting it up.
Oh, got it.
Like, for example, I look at this one, and I see that where the chisel cut that I did, it was on the wrong side of the chisel cut, so I need to, I haven't got a chisel with me, so I need to just pick another piece that works. So there we go. And these are little pieces, that's still, sorry, I'm looking for the right fit here. These are little pieces that I just cut off with the bandsaw, super thin, and then I used strangely enough, a card scraper to create a taper on them. So got a little glue here, and just lay these guys out, do them one at a time. Making sure that my taper is these little bottles are so good for glue. I'm not going to worry at this point about extra glue. I'm more concerned with getting that down in the hole. And as a righty, I seem to need to do it with my right hand. Okay, did I bring in? Normally, I didn't bring in a hammer, unfortunately, so we'll use this. But you would use a hammer and a little bit of wood in between to tap that down into the groove. In the next one, I could almost use the glue from this one, making sure I'm looking at the taper. This is where if you're on something that's you want to be careful about dripping the glue in onto the finished article. And you want to get these in place fairly quickly, because although the glue says half an hour for setup, I mean for half an hour till clamping. Now that piece is not good. You see, it's already taking. Now, when you come into a corner, it's nice to have that at 45 degrees, because if you're going into the corner, you want to join the two together at a 45-degree angle.
These close-ups are really great. Thank you.
Oh, I'm glad you're enjoying them. This is old Lewis. Lewis is standing here holding the camera.
Thank you, Lewis.
Steady hand. Okay, and then I don't need to tap it down far, partly because the groove is, all I need to do is get a tight fit, partly because the groove is not very shallow, not very deep anyway, and I don't want to go deep. The more I go deep, the more times I run that thing over, the more risk I have of touching something that then leaves it not looking sharp. All right. I'm sure there are better techniques for doing this. You don't want to whack it too hard, though. All right. Do I have tissue around? I'll just take off the surplus glue so it doesn't gum up my tools in a short while. I'm going to plane this surface anyway, so I don't need to worry about residues of glue on the surface. Okay, let's go to making it, and we'll just leave that to dry up. So we've got a little blank here, and we want to cut, or we want to joint at least, I usually joint all 4 edges at the same time, but I'm only going to joint 2 to make one piece. This is not quite square, but it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to make a bead, a 1/4-inch bead, just like this one here. And so the first thing I'm going to do is get my edges. So that's all of these edges before I cut the shape. Get all these edges nicely jointed and then sort of polished. So what I'm going to do, I'm only going to do 2 edges. This is a jig I use for saws and for sharpening saws and for card scrapers. And we're also going to joint the edge. So the object is to get a completely straight edge there. We don't need to do much on a tiny little piece like this. Again, having a block of wood with the file set in a groove, as we have here. See, this is just a bastard mill file. I'm not sure the full, probably said the wrong kind, but anyway, that's all it is. It's just in a little groove that's exactly the width of this, which must be the exact width of a router. Well, no, it doesn't have. It doesn't must be. Okay, so now I've got those edges straight. So now what I want to do, I'm sorry, I'm going to remove this cherry. Such a beautiful wood, cherry. And so nice to work. If you're a new woodworker, treat yourself and get some cherry and work it. It's just really nice wood and comes up with a gorgeous finish that goes to a deep red color over the years. So here's my piece. And the next thing I'm going to do is, now I've filed these edges clean, but I need to also have nice clean faces as well. So I'm going to go to my 600 grit diamond stone, and we don't get too obsessed about grits and stuff. So not much difference between a 500 and a 600 grit. Now I can feel that there's a burr on the edge there. So I'm going to first of all get rid of that big burr, making sure I know which of my 2 surfaces or 2 edges that I'm already preparing, right? So then I'm going to do the edges the same way. which is going to, of course, leave a little burr on it. It would almost be less hassle for me to do all 4 edges instead of having to remember the edges. Okay, so now it's even more, it's straight and has a slightly smaller scratch pattern. So we flip this over to 1200 grit. Run that puppy back and forth. I'm not going to worry about, I'm having to remember which is my edge now. I'm not going to worry about, what am I not going to worry about? About the burr at the moment. I'm going to take that off a little later. So we got the 1200 and there's a little burr on there, and we are now ready to take it to get a nice clean edge. So we go to an 8000 grit. Now, if you only have 6000, don't worry about it, just use the 6000. You just get a marginally cleaner edge with the 8000. So the first thing I'm going to do is try to polish up those faces. It's just as easy to polish the whole face as it is to just get the corner that you want to do, but you focus on the corner you want to do, which ultimately will probably be all 4. There's no point in wasting wood. A little bit more water. Glad it's my bench. Okay, not perfect, but I'm a little obsessive anyway, so less than perfect is going to do us just fine. Okay, now those faces are reasonably flat. I'm going to do the edges. And as a final flourish, I'll pull that back there, just to take out any tiny, tiny burrs that might be in there. Okay, so don't get too obsessive about this. If I were you, you probably could start playing with one of these when it's at 1200 grit. Okay, so we got now 2 edges and a corner in which we want to put a half moon picture. So we use ideally a metal vise, but you could create something out of wood easily to hold it. I just happen to have this handy dandy metal vise, and I want to get my thing down so that most of the metal is held. I don't want to go bending it if I can avoid it. I'd rather have it too far down and then have to push it back up again. All right, so now it's nice and well held there. And I want to create that bead. If you, let me see, is that, oh, no, there, it's here. Okay, if you look at this bead here, you'll see it just happens to fit chainsaw file. Happens to be the exact diameter for of a chainsaw file. I wonder why. In this case, I'm going to take this file, which is a 1/4-inch file, round file, and I'm going to create that. But before I do that, I want to get some kind of a guide, because one critical part of this is the distance here, because it denotes how wide your bead is going to be from, how deep this shadow is going to be, as it were, how wide this groove is going to be. Sorry, I'm not making much sense. So once I've established, you know, either by carefully measuring or by eyeball, exactly where I want to do, I'm going to give myself a groove right down the middle of where I want to go with my circular file. So I'm going to use a triangular file, but you could just as easily use a hacksaw. And we don't need to be too precise. I just want to create. See the way that blade is moving? It's not terribly good, so I'm going to move it further in. Okay, so I've got a little groove, so I can drop the bottom of this curve, because I don't know if you've ever tried to file using a curved file on metal, but it really helps to have some kind of guide. All right, so if you just want a little shallow bead, you stop there. If you've got a tapered file, you just use the part of the tapered file that gives you the width you want. Okay, that's almost a half circle. Go just a little further. Of course, if you want something that's more like a doorway shape with a little arch on the top, you just go deeper, but make sure you go down in a straight line. All right, that's still to my eye, not even halfway. And of course, I'd know when I was going too deep because there'd be a gap between as I go too deep. But we'll call that a day on that. So you see, now we've got a nice little half moon there, and if we wanted to, we could create other shapes to it. So now the critical part is getting this little bit sharp. And there's a few ways to do it. Probably the easiest way to do it is using sandpaper in increasing grits. So I'm going to start with a little piece of 250 sandpaper. You could of course create various edges there to accommodate any shape you want. And if you've already got a scraper, you could even use the scraper to create that shape. But then you just put something like a piece of sandpaper on it and see if it fits in this case. Yep, there you go. Do you see the way it sets down in there? So I'm going to don't need to do it a whole lot. Just roll this around just to allow for any flat spot. The other thing I could do, which would work equally well and perhaps in some cases better, is take the paper and roll it up. It doesn't have to be perfect to the size because it will mold itself to the size. So I'm trying to keep you with fairly low-tech tools, so you can see that it's kind of shaped itself to the little round bit there. So that's 250. Not 250. 220. And then, excuse me, let me just pull this board out. I'm going to pull this off here.
And really what you're doing is knocking the burrs off, right?
No, actually, I haven't knocked the burrs off yet. What I'm doing is creating the face of this little circle to get to be as polished as those are there. So I'm doing the old trick of going up through the grits. So in this case, my next step is 400. So I got a little roll of 400. If I had 320, I go 320 in between. I'll take the burrs off at the end, is to answer your question. And you can see, I think I can see, it's already getting a much less of a scratch pattern and more of polish type thing, and then you can go up through the. Now you remember I said earlier that taking it to 8,000 is probably a little over the top in terms of cleaning the face and so on. Part of the reason is because even the finest sandpaper only goes up to a couple of thousand, and you're unlikely to get beyond that without spending a little money. So that was the 600. And you could, again, depending on your obsession, or you can take this as fine as you want. I'm going to call it a day, probably at about 1,000 thread. The important thing is to see that that little edge there is cleaning up. Now you can also use diamond paste on little dowels. You could use, if you wanted to, you could use, you know, sandpaper on little dowels. Oh, I love that now. Means we're getting somewhere. Well, that's the 1,000. Is that the 1,000? And is that, I think, is as far as we go in terms of the. So we're nowhere near the 8,000 in terms of the polish on here. Now because I happen to carve as well, here are a few, for various curved blades, I have various bits and pieces for you know, getting an edge on those curved blades. But this is one of my favorites, is the ceramic slipstone, which just happens to be the same diameter as this. So this is what I finish it up with, but this is cream on the cake. Do you see the little dust that's flying off there? Shows you it's flying.
We just hear the bird chirps.
Huh?
We just hear the bird chirps.
Yes. Yes, there's a tiny, tiny little clouds of shavings coming off there. Okay, so we're in there. We've almost made it. So we still have perfectly good edges here, and we have a pretty good edge here, and we don't appear to have any burring. But what we'll do is we'll go back to the 8,000, and just never any harm in that, especially with the thumb down on the piece that we've just made. Anything about what I've done that makes you need to ask questions about how or why? Either you've all gone to sleep or
No, just finishing the string example.
I'm sorry? Oh, you're waiting for the stringing demo.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, well, then I'm going to stop at that point. Oh, yeah, 5 to 11. We can still do that. Now, so the way I'm going to set this up, and all I'm going to do is demo that we can start doing it. The way I'm going to set this up is with my bead right on the edge there. Of course, if I wanted a little shoulder on that bead, I'd just push that a little further in. Okay. Sorry?
Want to show a close up of it?
Oh, yes. So you see, I've set the edge of that circle right at the edge there.
Very nice.
And then, you know, so that's quite a wide groove I'm going to give myself there. Okay. I'm going to use poplar just because I've got the stringing sticking up out of the other one. I don't want to ruin that. So I'm just going to use an old piece of poplar here to demo. Okay, so much the same deal, but because this is sticking up and because I've cleaned up these edges, you've got to remember that those are sharp edges. So, you know, it might behoove you to use something to pat it with, or at least just be aware. I'm trying to, there we go. There's a good way to hold it. This is quite a bit larger than the bead I made, but look at that. remarkable edge you get there. Careful up here. It is a careful process, but you get used to it. And you, again, because woodwork tends to use all 5 senses, you'll use all those senses. So this one, it's a slightly heavier cut, so it's going to take a little longer. But you can see the edges coming off of there, and all I've got to do is go a little deeper to get that bead. So that's a very, very simple tool. But remarkably effective. It's astonishing how those little shadow lines that you get at the edge of drawers, and you know, and of course in art and carving, shadows are everything. But you know, sometimes you want those shadow lines, sometimes you don't. Things like this can be really good if you're not happy with, say, the gap between 2 doors. You can kind of hide that gap by rolling that edge off nicely. It, you know, gives you some forgiveness on stuff that, as well as often creating a nice shadow line there that's fun. Okay, so we want to get to this from, let me just clear the bench here. You know what I love about these things is you can go and there are some excellent ones out there. You can buy a professionally made scratch stock that, you know, you could possibly even buy a few scratch stock blades cut to size, but that's all you've got. You've still got to make your scratch stock blades. So why not just make the handle? You're a woodworker. It's a piece of cake. So let's go back to this baby. I'm going to clamp it down again. Just looking for a call. Okay, so I know why Travis has been waiting for this, because it really is the most satisfying part. Now you want to be a little careful. You don't want to cut it off. I think this is a flush cut saw, but I'm not sure. I don't want to cut it off right at the bottom there. I just want to take out some wood. And now I've got another piece I can recycle. Gently, gently, gently. You can almost hear the difference in the consistency of the 2 woods. Maple is so much softer. Okay. Okay. So we blow or brush it away, and we're all done, right? Looks great to me. Or we can finish it.
Yeah.
Where's my plane? Oh. My plane's looking a little dirtier because I used it to plane rosewood yesterday, and it left all kinds of rosewood on it. So let me just check on the set for this. I'm kind of a harsh setting there. Let's give it a finer setting. I always start this stuff with the finest setting I can, and then if I need to, because I'm just cutting through tiny bits of wood, if I need to, I can go coarser. So I'm going to go a bit coarser for, there we go. All right, magic's beginning to happen.
Oh, yeah.
So now I'm going to go a little finer. Now you sit there and you look at this stuff and you think, wow, what a craftsman that dude was, you know? And it's like, now you know, it's beautiful, and you have to think it out and design it, but it's stringing is really good. It'll reduce the apparent dimensions. And so you're just, using a smoothing plane. Take the rest of the surface down to that. And I'll just slap a little water on it so you can get an idea of what it'll look like when it's got a finish on it.
I think the message here is Derek Hack, watch out. Is that correct?
No, I think he's the master. No, I think go watch his video because, in addition to mine, he really knows. He's been doing it for decades. I've been doing it for a very short time, but he does make beautiful furniture though, because what he does is he takes the idea of that sort of fine look of federal furniture, and then he'll put a wavy edge in a couple of different dimensions on one edge, and he just changes the whole piece. Now there's this incredibly formal looking piece, but he's just done something completely different on it. You should really look at his work. He's a pretty cool guy. He's a real neat teacher as well. Wow, 5 after 11.
Well done, sir.
All right. Any questions? So I'm hoping that next time we, maybe over the next few months, we'll see a few photos go up on our website of people who've done bits of stringing, because in boxes and stuff like that, it could be such fun. But practice on some pieces first. Get a little practice on that and look at. I'm terrible. I don't watch YouTube. I never sit down long enough to watch that stuff, and I could probably benefit greatly by watching a lot of that stuff. But I just have to learn by making mistakes and doing it again and reading and stuff like that, and learning from people.
Could you tell us the story of how your sheet music cabinet was transformed when you decided, as you did in your article, how the beading made a difference?
Are we able to throw that one up with the picture? It's an article.
I'm not a host, so no, sorry.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, there are a few pictures of there's a little article that was a preview to this SIG went up a couple of days ago, and it's a little article where it shows a piece that I had. It's my wife asked me to make this sheet music cabinet, and it had to go under a particular window because she likes to play the keyboard, and it had to be able to take her big books of sheet music, and we wanted to be able to make it so that you could move the shelves around. So it's designed so you can move the shelves around. And then I put pierced carvings on the sides and through the doors. And when I mounted the doors and looked at it, it was just like, it just didn't have the wow that I thought it should have after the work that I'd done to it. So I just I thought about it and I looked at it and I thought, well, what do I need to do to fix this? And it just something, you look at something and it's just like, it's not quite there, and just something very subtle makes the difference. And what I ended up doing was harping back to Garrett's class and making a bead on the sides of each, not on the tops, but just on the sides, because there was already a nice shadow defining the tops of the doors. But once that was done, somehow everything just seemed to come into balance, and it was just really cool. And people seem to like it. So, and my wife certainly likes it.
How do you spell, is it Garrett Hack or is it Garrett Hatch? How do you spell it?
It's Garrett, and then his last name is Hack, H-A-C-K. And he, there's a link to his video of how to do exactly what I've just showed you. So there's a link in that article that's on our website to that. And he's well worth looking at. He's a contributing editor to Fine Woodworkers, a fine woodworking magazine, and he every now and again he throws up designs that are really worth doing especially for someone like me who's relatively new in woodworking. If I want to learn some new skills, I'll usually build somebody else's design you know, if I want to learn how to do, you know, the value of, say, making 2 tenons on a joint instead of 1 or something like that, I'll use somebody else's design. And I've made a couple of his designs, and he's got some interesting ones in Fine Woodworker there, and lots of little articles about woodwork.
Great.
Anything else? All righty. So now we will see you. Well, it'll be pretty much 2 weeks, won't it? Because we'll be on the second. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time. And I thank you guys for checking in, and look forward to seeing you again, as does Lewis. And if you guys have any suggestions, especially for future presentations, Wesley actually suggested the scratch stock, which, you know, I was like, why didn't I think of that? But if you give me suggestions, I'll listen, and, you know, in the fullness of time, we'll get to them. So
Great.
But please, you know, always looking for those, and even with different ways to format it. And the light is at the end of the tunnel. I'm not sure if it's a train coming towards us or really is the light at the end of the tunnel, but we might actually be meeting in person within the next few months, which would be just great. You know, we can probably do a video and a hybrid of the two, you know.
Sounds great.
And get other people involved as well.
Thank you, Paul.
Yes. Thank you. Bye.